Hello, welcome back to the #1 marathon channel on YouTube. I am with Joku, I am Jake, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the marathon timeline. Joku has some insights, some ideas, some wonderful, cool little bits of lore that were not included in my last timeline video that I did, and so we're going to take a gander at that. The wonderful, the glorious, the great, the magnificent, the #1 marathon YouTuber, Joku, how are you doing?
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for introducing me to my audience. I really appreciate it. And
You're welcome.
We really appreciate how you're just really bringing the hype for the new marathon game. You're the #1 marathon 2025 hype machine, I guess.
Yeah. Maximum #1 Bungie marathon shill, reporting for duty.
I watched Jake's timeline video on marathon, and I had a few cringe moments, even though the video was absolutely amazing. And so we're actually recording this a second time. The first podcast, I screwed up the recording. I'm sorry, Jake. That was the first time that's happened.
Now you're giving it away. You're giving away the movie magic.
But Jake said
actually rehearsed.
But Jake promised that this time, every time I say something like he didn't think about, he's gonna be just as excited, if not more excited, than the first time.
Yeah, this time I'm gonna go. No, actually, I did already think about that.
All right. Let's jump into it. So his marathon video, I would just encourage you to go watch it before this one. I'm not gonna. I thought about playing it. I think it's just better just to go to his channel and watch it first, if you're so obliged. But actually, I need to share my screen with you. That would probably be helpful. So
I think if you want to, because I know you have like a document. If you want to just hit the timestamps, because I think now that we've been through it once, I have a reference. I think I'm
okay. Maybe I'll just go to it on my screen then. So at 43 seconds, you talk about the timeline from the arrival of the date was she got the year 2794, July 3rd, 1408, 14 hours 8 minutes and 39 seconds. And I just wanted to talk about that time for a little bit because now I'm trying to explain this like it's for the first time again, but I think
you
generally
you do great. Yeah.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it. So the thing is that there's no other terminal, and I think you did a good job. I think your explanation is reasonable, but I think I just wanted to expand on it that there's no terminal in the first marathon game that has that number of digits with the seconds on it. And so when we first saw all these time, or I wasn't there, but from reading Hamish's story page, I can kind of see the history where they had to figure out, well, what is this time? Is this actually a date? What is the format for these dates? And they were able to piece together, and I'm not going to get into how, but that it's year, month, day, hour, minute, right? So, but the problem with interpreting it the way that Jake interpreted it, not to say he's necessarily wrong, but is the 2794 is definitely the date that the four attacked, but the 140839 doesn't make a lot of sense for when the four attacked, because that would mean that that's the time that the security officer got there. And if you can clearly see in this, it's 0820, 0830 for the aliens boarding the marathon, but the manual's timeline doesn't fit that the security officer would have got there 6 hours later. So the story page and Hamish, assumed that maybe the 0839 was the time that this message was posted. And so I think that's why the Lost Network packets gave a different date for the 4 attack than July 3rd. So that just adds some ambiguity to, is this really the 4 attack or not? And so now that you heard that for the first time, Jake, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like it's very it was written in the format where because it makes a lot of logical sense that you would go from this descending order, right? Year, month, day, hour, minute, second, right? So I think that makes sense, and I do think that's probably what Greg or Jason Jones, intended when they wrote it. And then obviously, I guess probably they weren't foreseeing the Hamish Sinclair story page and all these people going, very thoroughly through everything. And as you're pointing out, I don't know if you referenced this exactly, but the timeline, I forget what the name of the bits and interesting facts page is for the time and marathon, but it's all like linked through the Lost Network packet stuff. But obviously that's a very intriguing read, and I would assume there was probably a little bit of air just generated from the fact that they were generally putting this stuff together, but as far as people digging into it the way they did, maybe they didn't necessarily expect that. And so obviously course correcting for Marathon 2 with the Lost Network packet was a pretty big thing. So I guess if we're interpreting it as this is 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that would mean that there's some weird amount of time with the security officer in that whatever escape shuttle. Maybe I'm using the language, not the correct language there. The Murata,
escape pod,
in the pod, escape pod, right? Yeah. To get to the marathon.
It's a maneuvering pod. That's what it says. Maneuvering pod. Yeah.
So it's like maybe he was floating there for a while, or maybe he was trying to figure out. I know when you turn around, right, on arrival, right, you can see the pod there. So maybe he was trying to figure out how to get into that first section for a while, or maybe like we're talking about with the Lost Network packet. A lot of the dates and times are intentionally obscured by Leela to kind of confuse things if we're to get into four hands so that things wouldn't go to awry. But to what extent and why that would really matter in terms of this emergency broadcast message on the day of, probably isn't super relevant. But yeah, more so I was just trying to illustrate that they're going with that kind of initial 2794 date as opposed to the Lost Networks packet date and the updated timeline later on.
Yeah, and then in your video you do mention how perhaps Von Mueller, gave the incorrect date, to Durandal, or I guess I don't know if that necessarily makes sense with the dates the messages were posted, but anyways, I tend to wonder if when we see this, because this is the only one like this, if Bungie went back and intentionally changed the last two to 0839, not realizing there was an extra digit, But
yeah, right.
But at the same time,
trying to determine the errors as well.
Yeah, and then, but the other thing is if they did intend the date to be July 3rd, why in the Lost Network packets did they go to? I think it was July 25th, right, or something.
Mm-hmm.
So. I don't know, and it might just be some error by some recent college grads, though. I'm not really sure. Or some of them might have been. I don't know if any of them were still in college when they wrote this. Probably, but anyways.
Yeah, well, and something that I think we'll probably talk about a little bit more later on. But I do like the idea that the new narrative team is taking these things that are like interesting tidbits or errors or potential kind of faults in the writing of, like you're saying, young, fresh out of college people who are doing this first major project that was like innovative and new in a lot of ways as well. So, but I do like the idea that they're taking that premise and then kind of introducing it as canonical information in the context of, well, later on where the series goes from a narrative perspective is kind of exploring these concepts of time dilation and alternate timelines and all these different, weird sci-fi twists on how we interpret linear time. So I do like the idea that they're like, oh, maybe we canonize everything that happened in Marathon 1, 2, and 3. Really go this kind of route of Marathon Infinity and explore the kind of, abstract temporal aberrations of the anomaly and stuff in this new game through the lens that all of these mistakes are actually accurate in one way or another. And I also think they are using a lot of language about I can't point to anything directly, but when you hear like Julian Nardin and Joe Ziegler talking about stuff, they're talking about alternate timelines and who can you trust and what information is accurate. So, who is a reliable narrator and what kind of information was accurate, and also what stuff are we seeing is actually chronologically true will be a very cool thing to dig into, I think, once we get a bigger picture as to what the story is going to be.
Yeah, and the only last thing I'll add on to that is I think that, and as we get through this, some of my comments and stuff on this video and then through this podcast, I think what you'll see is that it seems like for whatever reason, this cinematic at this intro with the fourth battle or whatever or something else, it seems intentional that Bungie is trying to obscure what exactly it is and make us not sure whether it's a 4 attack or something else. And I think that's important to note, because if it is the 4 attack, which it totally could be, why are they intentionally making it not obvious that it is, or at least trying their hardest to hide it? And if it isn't the 4 attack, it's like they're trying to make it kind of look the 4 attack, but not, so I think Bungie is trying to throw us for a loop, so we have to figure out what really happened. So I think that's interesting. Moving on in the video, we talk a little bit about the... No, I'm just playing an ad. So I'll just tie that. But we talk a little bit about the retcon for Marathon 2. You talked about how, going from Marathon 1 to Marathon 2, there's a retcon, and Marathon 2 to Marathon 3, there's a retcon. And you're absolutely right. And I think I just had something about maybe Marathon 1 to Marathon 2. I'm going to go in some details about why I think maybe that was either an unintentional retcon, or they just purposely left out facts because there's some stuff in the design documents that show that perhaps they kind of had a plan of how to explain that. But obviously from Marathon 2 to Marathon Infinity, the retcon is very intentional because it's part of the story. And I think that's important to distinguish the two, because it seems like, maybe some of the retcons that we're seeing here are more intentional, like Marathon Infinity, and that's kind of the case. I just want to give some background to kind of make my case of why I think that might be the case. Of course, everything is subjective. So,
yeah.
So at the end of Ingwe Ferokwe, Terminal 2, or Terminal 1, I'm sorry, Durandal says, "I'll send you a postcard from the Galactic Court if we're not too busy." So obviously he's giving the intention that he's going to leave the security officer behind. And then, the last message from Leela, what did she say? "The 4 ship vanished about 20 minutes ago after venting nearly 1,004 bodies and other refuse." So basically it's saying you stayed on the Marathon with Leela, Durandal left 20 minutes ago, and that's kind of like where the game ends. Durandal's searching for Low One for 17 years. As far as you're still on the Marathon. But however, in Marathon 2, as we all know, find out you were on stasis on the Boomer with, the Sphere, and now the Boomer with Durandal.
Yeah.
And now you're at Tau Ceti and you were asleep the whole time and you woke up. And it really doesn't, it's kind of, Waterloo Water Park is kind of interesting because it makes it sound like he's going to, tell you what's going to go on, what happened, but he never really tells you. He says, "I'm sure you're wondering why you were in stasis, what happened to the Marathon and Tau Ceti, and most of all, where your rocket launcher and fusion gun are. There'll be plenty of time for explanation later." But he never explains the part of why am I here, which is probably well, I mean, he does explain why you're there from a story arc from Marathon 2, but he doesn't explain how you got from the Marathon into the stasis chamber. But interestingly enough, in the preview and demo terminal, let's see. I'm trying to look for the exact line. Okay, he says, "Immediately after we left the colony on Tau Ceti, I teleported you directly into one of the stasis chambers on the scout ship, and you remained there for the entire journey through the core." So in this one, it tells you he teleported you off the Marathon into the stasis chamber. And he says immediately after. I mean, obviously it was at least 20 minutes later. So immediately is longer than 20 minutes. But now I'm going to go to the original. No, it's design. Hold on. Let me find this on the story page. Oh, the Marathon 2 story outline. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. Okay, the events on Tau City after Marathon 1. The colony is destroyed and enslaved. Durandal knew this would happen. He discovered a distress signal which had broadcast from the scout ship during the takeover and knew the Ford would be coming. This is why he transported you off the ship instead of leaving you behind as he had originally intended. So, I think this shows at least Bungie had some kind of idea of how to explain how the security officer got teleported or would have been teleported off in one of the stasis chambers on the boomer, and they either intentionally decided it wasn't worth putting in and left it out. They might have overlooked it while they were making Marathon 2 and the terminals. I'm not really 100% sure. I think some of it, I think they like purposely leave ambiguous. There's also a lot of story changes in Marathon 2, which I haven't really fully digested yet. But that's kind of my case. Is I think that if you look at this, this retcon in Marathon 1 to Marathon 2 is kind of like a minor retcon that might have been a slip on Bungie's part. Whereas Marathon 2 to Marathon Infinity is a very intentional retcon. And so when I see some of these changes in the new game, I kind of am tying it more to a retcon that's like Marathon 2 to Marathon Infinity. So, anyways, that's my long spiel.
But yeah, no, I definitely think what they're doing now is much more intentional. I kind of get the feeling maybe it wasn't this way going Marathon 2 to Marathon Infinity. Maybe Marathon Infinity was a pretty sure thing, but I kind of get this feeling that like Marathon 1 to Marathon 2 wasn't necessarily as guaranteed when they were like finished writing the story for Marathon 1. Maybe it was. Maybe they knew that's what they were going to do next, but my assumption would be that like they didn't know for sure exactly kind of where the studio was going to be at after the release of Marathon 1. I mean, maybe they definitely probably wanted to continue telling that story, but it does seem like they kind of left the door open enough at the end of Marathon 1, but they didn't probably necessarily know exactly where they were going to go with it. So my thinking was always that it was like, okay, well, we can just change a little bit around and then we'll be kind of in the clear to do this kind of Indiana Jones style adventure for the second one is what it kind of feels like to me. We're going to this alien planet, we're digging around these ancient kind of alien areas. And we'll be able to do that. But I do think that kind of like what you're saying is like the intentional nature of the retcons in Marathon Infinity obviously stand out and feel way different, I feel like, from the very minor changes Marathon 1 to Marathon 2. Which kind of like what I was getting at earlier. I think that the new narrative team is really playing with some of those ideas, which I think is really cool. And then obviously bringing back the video you had shared last week, maybe at this point, with Robert McLeese kind of coming back around and reintroducing some of these kind of concepts in a lot of different ways. Like they're kind of like looking at everything and kind of treating it all as this almost like larger universe, and maybe some things that we were interpreting one way were actually another, and kind of tied to a lot of in-universe aspects. And I think it's pretty sick. I think it's pretty rad. But yeah, definitely a different kind of story reset from Infinity, which is obviously like kind of written around these narrative resets and different kind of versions of events, as opposed to Marathon 2 is just kind of making some slight tweaks to make this story kind of make sense in the way that they want to tell it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when Jake is talking about Robert McLeese, so there's a guy named Miguel Chavez, and he's known as
#1 Bungie fan.
Yes, exactly. And you can see him in some of the old Bungie films, and I have a few of them. So I've seen him on video before I actually like talked to him, so that was kind of interesting. But anyway, he had a stream where he was just showing off a bunch of Bungie memorabilia with Goldsbane, and I guess Miguel, he's talked to and met in person quite a few Bungie people by going to events, in the 90s and probably into the 2000s, I would guess too. So I'm sure he invited, Lorraine and some of the other, Bungie folk from back in the day. So Lorraine ended up coming on the stream, and so did Robert McLeese, and they confirmed that Robert was still working on the Marathon story. which we knew he was.
Super rad.
Yeah, we knew he was working on some of the ARG. I always thought he was still working on it, but I guess it wasn't quite as clear as maybe I thought it was, and so a lot of people were kind of surprised. So that was that, or not necessarily surprised, but are happy to learn that for sure he was still working on it is probably the way to go. So yeah. So that was pretty rad. So let's move on. I guess I gotta get past your ad. We gotta pay Jake his dues. Okay, let's see. We gotta go to. So now we're gonna talk about that explosion, Jake. You remember my amazing thoughts about the explosion.
The explosion on the marathon. Yes.
Yeah. So let's.
Try to dig as well. I dig this.
Okay, so now we're getting another ad. So, geez, what's with these mid-roll ads? Geez, Jake, like you're really trying to milk it, aren't you? So,
how do you do it? Do you automatically? I just hit the button. I just hit the button that says on.
I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you.
I can say that.
Okay, so right here, I don't know.
Turn ads off right now.
If he comment period goes by a frame. So if you go right here at the start of this explosion on the marathon, you can see it doesn't. They don't show a meteor actually come and hit the marathon. I'm not saying that it necessarily couldn't be or a missile even that hit it, but they don't actually show it, directly here that anything hit it. So I have a crazy, conspiracy theory, because I am partly crazy, but I mean, all us Bungie fans are to some degree. I mean, I guess I shouldn't speak for everybody, but that maybe this is like a bomb or something that's coming from an internal explosion. Because if you watch, everything, the explosion is blowing out, which doesn't mean it couldn't be a missile. But and then as we get out, you start to see stuff flying off of the marathon, and now almost like there's some kind of internal pressure. And so, and then obviously we go to the other side and, see the black tank or whatever this thing is flying out of it. And so my crazy conspiracy theory is that maybe there's a bomb or something that was planted on the marathon with the intention of blowing this tank off. Because this tank is some kind of, I don't know, maybe it's something critical piece of something in it. I don't really know, but it seems like maybe there's something obviously important about it, because they're kind of like focusing the shot on it and showing something flying out intentionally.
Yeah.
We don't know what that is yet. Maybe this is something that's tied to will be tied to some story element on maybe it's something we gotta find on Tau Ceti or or wherever it flew off to as one of the missions that will be in the game. I think that's kind of, it's just something to think about as we like experience the game, and something to be looking out for. So
yeah, and I know we had brought this up last time, but I was saying a few people had mentioned that in I believe it's Marathon 2, Durandal kind of talks about using a orbital bombardment, I forget the exact language, of potentially like natural celestial bodies, and that here we're obviously seeing these structures that are kind of like meteors right after this explosion. So the idea that potentially this is tied to Durandal's rampancy and some sort of intentional plot, or maybe some sort of MIDA operation, or in this timeline it wasn't the 4 that got there first, it was whatever maybe some Martian rebels were up to, or some rampant AI was trying to disrupt the activities that the colonists were up to. So definitely, like you were saying, it seems like they're intentionally trying to kind of leave that vague, but obviously this is kind of one of those things where we're getting these small hints at what it could be, what could be the alternative paths that led to some very bad times for people on in 2794 for these colonists. That wasn't necessarily the 4 attack, and I think your next point is kind of going into that as well, with the where we see the lines kind of the meteor asteroids or missiles kind of coming at it from different angles.
There's one other thing I want to talk about with the missile lines, but one thing, like with going off of what you were talking about, is like maybe this is Durandal. If this is the 4 attack, maybe Durandal knew the 4 attack was coming, and he kind of like planned this explosion knowing the 4 were gonna come, right? And maybe this is just something that happened in Marathon that we don't, the classic Marathon game that we didn't know about, so that's another possibility. But the other thing I forgot to mention is when in the next scene you see like a missile or meteor or whatever hit the Marathon, and it shows this big ring and massive explosion. And I just forgot to mention that looks very different than the explosion or bomb or whatever it is that we saw in the previously. So just something to consider, that there's maybe some evidence that it's could be something different other than the missile or meteor, but we don't really know. So let's go forward a little bit. And so at some point you talk about
droids in
the 3 lines. Let's see, 607. Let's go there.
And I think all of this is kind of to say that it appears that the very first season or set of narrative content, the first like plot line, it seems to be like heavily revolving around figuring out what truly happened. Like the kind of like mystery plot seems to be the main through line for this initial content that we're getting. The plot lines that we got within the alpha were very centered around like what happened here, like what is going on kind of stuff. And this is obviously all kind of building on that idea, that kind of like things are not as they seem, or at least as you believe they happened or appear based off your prior knowledge of this wacky universe.
and something I want to add on is like I'm losing my train of thought. But anyway, something I was kind of thinking about when I made my cinematic short video is maybe this event that happened is, they're using July 3rd as a red herring, and the 4 attack still happened on July 25th, and there was another event that happened before the 4 attack, that obviously wasn't discussed in the classic Marathon game, which maybe you could call that a retcon, maybe not, I don't know, but I think that is a distinct possibility. It looks like maybe they're trying to destroy the Marathon and look like it's destroyed in this one, so maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyways, there's definitely things to consider, or things that Bungie could be playing with, and we're gonna have to figure out what happened. But anyways, onto the 3 lines that Jake alluded to earlier, because this is the first time I'm telling him this. Remember? So
yes, sorry. So get method acting here.
So in the manual, it talks about the Sphera coming and attacking the Marathon, and it also talks about his maneuvering pod, and that there's it says a fighter shoots a missile at the maneuvering pod, and there's speculation is the fighter the Sphera, or is it another ship that maybe came out of the Sphera? In the original Marathon games, there's never this idea clearly made that there's a bunch of ships that come out of I guess you could say a mothership, right? Like we see in a lot of sci-fi movies. So it's kind of like unclear, whether there's ships within the ship, you know what I mean? And so something about these 3 distinct lines, if there's only one ship, you know what I mean, depending on how you interpret the classic Marathon games, it's like, why is there 3 lines coming at you? You think it was the Sphera all be coming from one line. But then again, the security officer says it appears as a tensor mirage effect, I believe it says. And so maybe this Sphera is like teleporting around, if these are missiles and shooting them. I think also if you kind of look at these in the sky, like maybe how the fire is going around, maybe it looks more like a meteor than a missile. And there's a lot of things, or maybe Bungie retconned that it was a missile that hit the maneuvering pod, and now these are actually some kind of different lasers or something. I had no idea, but there's definitely some things to consider, that maybe this isn't quite what you would expect from comparing it to the classic Marathon, the original manual that describes this attack. Also, you don't really see a maneuvering pod. You don't see a fighter shooting the maneuvering pod. Anyways,
it would be cool. That would be a cool little Easter egg to have had, is if we saw very faintly the Murata, or some sort of other transport ship or something. That would have been would have been very cool. But not that there aren't, there's obviously a lot of other little Easter eggs in the trailer that hint at a bunch of stuff. So that kind of stuff is included. But yeah, like what you're saying, having an understanding of the technology and the actual ballistics that the 4 were using, or like you said, even if that's what we're looking at, is kind of one of those big questions in terms of what we're actually going to see in this game. And kind of one of the things I had speculated on in that video was like, oh, maybe these are like drop pods that the 4 are coming down to the planet on, maybe but then again, it's like, we don't know. Well, some type of technology thing might be occurring here, and it does seem very intentional. Last time we had talked about that shot where it's facing back at the colonists, and the vehicle, the Forkbot, the Forkmobile, is behind them, and it seems like, oh, that's so intentionally placed in terms of like hiding something that could be in the sky opposite of the Marathon. So I don't know.
Yeah,
very cool.
I was going to ask you to talk about if you wanted to talk about that shot. So you were reading my mind. I don't know. We got some Marathon connection here. But anyways, like is that Forkmobile hiding, a Marathon the Sphera, or did they intentionally place it there like it's hiding the Sphera when it's literally hiding nothing? Or maybe it's hiding something completely different. Bungie is playing with our minds here, like answently, and I think that shot like summarizes it perfectly. Because is there something there? Is there nothing there? What's going on? I don't know. So I think that's very interesting. And then at 6:18, the truth is revealed. Oh, now we're getting another ad. you probably
is it because you're pausing?
Maybe.
Is that what it's doing?
Maybe, but I mean, so Jake in the sky.
This is going to count for the revenue.
He looks at the sky and he shows a face. that was hilarious. although
the face was there. I just brought it to life.
Obviously, I thought maybe this little black orb looking thing maybe to the left was, maybe he missed that part of the face. I don't know. Or maybe this face is really disfigured. I don't know. But I thought that was kind of funny.
Perhaps it's an ear.
Okay, so
I'm convinced on the face. The more and more I look at it, maybe it's just my art though doing the heavy lifting.
I think that's Durandal out there, looking down on us. Okay, at 6:45. You talked about some kind of the meteors or missiles or whatever that were hitting the planet. I thought maybe these aren't meteors or missiles. Maybe these are 4 in what did you call them?
I think my words were ODST style drop pods, which I don't know if you've played Halo 3 ODST, but just the idea that they might have these insectoid 4. Locked into these alien kind of drop ships that are just plummeting towards the planet, and giving a little bit of a rough landing for our soft human bodies. But perhaps the 4 would be okay with that.
Yeah, and you kind of talked about the shape of it. That perhaps it's more like, the shape like one of these drop pods, or the 4 inside of whatever this thing is called. And I think that's an interesting thought. I think that's would make a lot of sense. And I wanted to jump to on Marathon's first webpage. Let's go to it real quick. They had some additional stuff in this. Okay, let's see. They had some additional kind of stasis report. Let's talk about that. They said the spaceport on the planet below was destroyed by low nuclear weapons minutes after their attack on the Marathon began, but the aliens seem to be more interested in the station. So this was on Bungie's first webpage. Whether you want to call this canon or not probably depends on if you're looking at it, almost 30 years later, or if you were playing this game when the website was live.
Yeah, right.
But
I do think the other thing that we pointed out last time was the nuke to bedrock, right? That was the
one. That was the one. 30. 3 months after, right? after
Oh,
the
okay,
Thor
okay. You're talking about them destroying the spaceport. Gotcha. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of
so
myself.
this
back to my lines.
this is talking about right when the Thor attack at 20 hours. So basically what they're saying is the aliens seem more interested in the station, so most of their focus was on the station. And also remember, you know, in the first Marathon game, the colonists on Tau Ceti actually survived the Thor and able to repel them, you know, and you know, because they were focused on the Marathon. Thanks to the security officer and Durandal, you're able to beat back the Thor. But then Durandal tells us later on, while we're on low one, that the Thor actually came back 3 months later. Later you'll learn also with Tycho, and destroyed the colonists. So and nuked them to bedrock. I don't remember exactly what terminology it uses. I'd have to go back and look. But anyways, it says there's a spaceport and some kind of like relay station. So they knocked out the communications. I think there might even be, you know, a couple terminals about it. I don't know if I wrote down which ones. Yeah, but on bigger guns nearby, we could go jump at that one. Go jump to that one real quick. See if we can find it. Maybe if I look spaceport. The only thing which seems clear is that the spaceport was obliterated by low-yield nuclear weapons minutes after the attack on the Marathon began. This I can verify with my own optical instruments. So, basically they wouldn't be able to communicate with the Marathon after they used these low-yield nukes and destroyed kind of their radio antenna. The primary medium range radio antenna has been disabled or destroyed, which makes communication extremely difficult. And the reason I just bring this up is because the you know, missiles or meteors or whatever, or for, you know, landing, you know, doesn't really look like a nuclear attack on a spaceport. It could be that was somewhere else on Tau Ceti, and we just don't see that in this shot. But it's definitely something to ponder and think about. So,
as we do with all things Marathon. A lot of pondering.
I feel like you had some interesting thoughts last time, Jake. You need to remember what those were.
Trying to recall. I feel like you summed it up so well. I feel
maybe
you did a great job.
Maybe I shared your thoughts.
You stole my thoughts. Okay, let the record show the last time I said all that really nice stuff Joku just said.
Yeah, and then the other thing was just going back to the terminal on arrival. We know that the Marathon was breached 10 minutes after it was attacked. So, you know, these attacks all happened very quickly. You know, I can go back to arrival and show you again. You know, it's the very first terminal. Oh, why is it not going to the top of Hamish? 0820, you came under surprise attack. 0830, alien forces boarded the Marathon. So within 10 minutes, so all these attacks happen very quick. So if these attacks first happen, you would expect the nuclear attacks to happen almost immediately at the same time or within 10 minutes. So just something to think about.
Yeah. Especially with that alien tech.
And so now we're gonna go on to the next time frame. Unless you have anything more to say about that, and we might bounce back to it. But so the next part, let's see, what year was that? Maybe you have to. But anyways, you just talk. Oh, it's 2812. So this is right after Marathon 2 and Marathon Infinity, right? Do you remember? The part where it shows the guy dying in the field at 732.
Yes, yeah, with the fungus above him.
Yeah, so you kind of showed off that his let me go back a little bit. His canister is reading 00, and you're thinking maybe that's some fertilizer or whatever is in there that he's spraying, which I think is a real possibility. But I'm wondering if maybe perhaps it's his oxygen depleted, and now he's breathing the air. And because you kind of talk about how there's kind of like fungal stuff in the air, and you have this nice shot, which I'll pause it right on it, where you kind of show all the stuff in the air behind him, and he's like throwing up. Let's see, that's good. Maybe it's a little bit
So my
forward.
thinking was it looked like the tube like went to the sprayer or whatever that he was using, but obviously I think it makes more sense that he's being exposed to that probably, unless what he was using was actively fighting back against that. And we learn in the contracts in the Marathon Alpha that what we are seeing there is a kind of virus that's being spread through the flora, or maybe fauna is the right scientific. I think flora is the right scientific word for it. But that there is a virus or contagion that's causing the natural plant life and potentially all the wildlife on Tau Ceti to evolve very quickly. Like in the span of 6 months, we would get evolution that would occur on Earth over millions of years. And as human settlers on a foreign planet trying to create viable food resources via this new caloric tech, and these scientists like the wonderful Dr. Son, who we learn about in the Alpha as well. Obviously, that's a little problematic for them, because every time you create a genetically enhanced or produced plant to grow on this alien planet, it's now having to contend with viruses and other life that's evolving much quicker, and so these mutations can't be accounted for in the kind of stuff that they're producing to make their delicious bagged T9 cheeseburgers or whatever. And so, we learned that there was this contagion that the colony was dealing with, and we also learned later on with like the final contracts that were available in the Alpha that it was tied to this anomaly. So this anomalous presence that's creating these temporal distortions that are manipulating time is also tied to this contagion that was related to the wildlife on Tau Ceti, and obviously it affects. Well, I guess not obvious if you didn't see the contracts in there, but it not only affects biological life, but it also affects artificial life like the AI. So it's kind of this interesting mix of a contagion that's impacting not inorganic and organic material in a really interesting way, which obviously to me brings to mind the Sphit, who are these organic kind of natural creatures that were maybe imbued is the right word, with this kind of technological, computer-driven prowess from the Yarrow. And you correct me if it's a little bit wrong terminology there, but rough history of the Sphit. So this, and then obviously, like we were talking about earlier, with Robert McLeese coming back, who kind of had that concept of the fungal virus on Lahuan that would eventually get these kind of zombie-infected 4, which was scrapped and not included in Marathon 2, but eventually kind of became the Flood in the Halo series. With him now back, the idea that concept is maybe being introduced, and it would explain maybe why we have only seen a Sphit in the trailer in terms of the alien presence that we have so far. So, all very, very interesting stuff with that.
Yeah, so on all that new Marathon, I did watch some of Jake's video, and a lot of the new Marathon lore. I'm trying to wrap my mind around it. I'm not quite caught up to Jake's level yet, but one thing I think is very clear is that they're intentionally bringing back this kind of fungal zombie concept from Robert McLeese, of what he wanted to do originally in Marathon 2, and he has some concept art for it on the Marathon story page. You should definitely go check it out. But I don't think it's necessarily one-to-one. I think they're doing it quite a bit different, but it's definitely interesting, to say the least. So I guess anything to add on the fungal part before I move on?
Listen, I have to toot the fungal horn every chance I get, as I did have a video saying the fungus will be a big deal or is a big deal. So I will continue to espouse fungi, mushroom rhetoric as much as I can.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's going to be very relevant.
I did have a note here about where it says that 3 months later. So it's on Slings and Arrow of Outrageous Fortune when the Force destroyed Tau Ceti. It says, 3 months after we left Tau Ceti, the Four arrived in Force and sacked the human colony there. During that battle, perhaps Tycho communicated with the Four and related that he knew of my plans to them. Since they already know where this world was, the Four would arrive here long before us. So he's just talking about how... Anyways, they destroyed him 3 months later. It doesn't say exactly how. Tycho might expand on that later on in the game.
You're talking about how the colony was destroyed.
Yeah, I think Tycho talks more about it later, so maybe that wasn't in that terminal. But...
I think the big language is the nuked to bedrock, right? That we get in the final screen of Marathon 2. Is that right?
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah, let me go look at it real quick.
Because I think they say while the colony was being nuked to bedrock or something. And I believe that's the part that also talks about Leela's.
Oh yes. While Tau Ceti was being nuked down to bedrock in 2794, four scientists disassembled and removed the AI Leela. Yeah, so that's where it was. So good thought catching that. That's where. So that would have been 3 months after. Where that Slings and Arrow was talking about, because they survived. But then again, Marathon 2 was retcon, so who knows?
Yeah, right.
So it's, because we know this working character kind of messed up on low one all the timelines, and there's these waves that the terminal's talking about, and maybe these waves are. It says the waves are battle and the battles are waves, and it's talking about the waves being the working character and Yarrow fighting against each other. I always thought it was like the working character created them, but if you actually read the terminal, it's more talking about battles, so it's almost like the working character and the Yarrow fighting each other. But then if you go back to, Pathways into Darkness, if you consider that, canon with the working character, it also talks about them fighting battles, so I don't know, but, it's like, did this timeline disruption on low one, affect Tau Ceti, or is the timeline here messed up because, there was a working character at Tau Ceti and that's why the Yarrow were there? And did Randall perhaps come back? Because, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff to think about here, so...
Yeah, I definitely kind of just talk about the waves thing. The way that I've always kind of interpreted the I'm going to mess up the language not having it in front of me, but the battles were the waves, or the waves were, however, it always felt to me like the thing that they were describing was this idea that the Yarrow and the working character were ancient forces, and yes, they are advanced technologically in a way that we would understand, because we have computers and propulsion and these rockets that travel throughout the stars, but also it's these entities or races or whatever they are, right, are so old and so separated from human existence that even what they were doing was so abstract that we would probably explain it in modern physics, kind of like how we describe how stars were formed, that maybe our understanding of the natural world is tied to these entities in a way that we just wouldn't fully be able to understand unless we had some sort of direct explanation from them. But that the idea that these waves were battles, I'm literally thinking of the Big Bang and this kind of super dense material just conjoining into one space and exploding and creating these ripples throughout time of different materials combining and these chemical reactions creating new stuff in the universe. It's that's what it feels like they're describing, more so than a big space guy battle type thing. But then again, we get the stuff where it's the Yarrow trapping them on suns and that have teleportation technology, and that does feel much more in line with kind of sci-fi technology that isn't as abstract or kind of strange or natural in a way that this is kind of described as. But maybe that's a consequence of the millions of years of evolution in between those events. But just as a thought to that, since we were talking about it.
Yeah, and I just discussed it in my last video on 6,000 Feet Under a little bit. So I think it's part of the Spit origin story, and it's how the Spit were created. So it's but the Spit created originally by the working character, were they created by Yarrow? were they created by these waves caused by them fighting each other? There's some ambiguity there, and I think it's kind of purposely ambiguous because it's kind of like this fit origin story and they don't really understand it. They refer to these timeless creatures fighting each other where the working character are timeless, but also the Yarrow are timeless to them. And is it timeless because they're immortal? We know the working character are immortal, I think, from one of the terminals, but are the Yarrow also immortal? We don't really know, but one of the Yarrow, I think Pythia dies, assuming she's a Yarrow. I guess we don't know that for sure, but there's definitely a lot to go off of. But
yeah.
So at 9:45, there's this fit, and that's right after this guy dying in the field. He's growing some crops or tending to the crops or whatever. At least I assume it's this fit. I'm pretty sure it is. And the Spit, on the most part, all rebelled against the Four and joined Durandal. And so when I see this, I'm like, well, did Durandal come to Lowan, or not to Lowan, to Tau Ceti? And one of the things I'm like wondering, did he come to Tau Ceti because maybe there's a working character there because he had to deal with one on Lowan, he knows what they're capable of, and that he doesn't have a choice but to deal with them. And maybe the Spit Cur knew they were here, or maybe the Yarrow that was with the Spit Cur that sent him out, came back with them and informed Durandal of this information, and that's why he came back here. And maybe we'll see Spit Cur here too, and the Yarrow, since if that's the case. But there's definitely some stuff to speculate about that with the Spit being here. So
a 30-year payoff to a map Easter egg of the Yarrow were at Tau Ceti would be kind of amazing. 30-year concise payoff to that would be cool.
Yeah, and there's some people I've talked to in the Marathon story page, right, that were adamant that the reason that somehow the people on the Marathon knew that there were Yarrow at Tau Ceti, and that's why they originally chose that as a destination. And I think that there's some reasonable arguments you can make about why that might be the case. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Some even argue that perhaps Maida wanted to take over the Marathon because they wanted to get this Yarrow tech or whatever that they thought might be at Tau Ceti. And this kind of ties back into Pathways into Darkness, conspiracy theories that the Yarrow visited, Earth, and they,
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton, and so they kind of had this communication with the Yarrow. So maybe that's how they learned about the Yarrow and their technology, and maybe learned that they were at Tau Ceti. But anyways, a lot of stuff to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then,
absolutely.
And then at 10 minutes, I don't know if there's really much talking about what you talked about, but just that it's clear there's an anomaly here that he enters, then he's kind of sucked up, like cars flying, strange stuff is happening. Is this a Yarrow? Is this something else? I don't know. But there's some weird stuff going on. So
yeah, and just for reference, in the Alpha, one of the contracts that kind of is more you get some in-game voice lines as you go to a colonist who was unfortunately sucked into one of these things, and his brain has been turned into purple tendrils, and he's been pulled inside of the anomaly. And you get a voice recorder that he was carrying on him but wasn't absorbed into the anomaly, and you hear the recording of him, but it's out of order. So these temporal changes of non-linear time are something that's literally happening inside of the anomaly, but the recording device outside the anomaly is still experiencing linear time, and so you get this out of order. Hey, I'm here at the anomaly. Oh my God, abort! All right, I'm gonna check out the anomaly. Oh, there's something weird here. All right, just got the anomaly kind of thing going on. So just for a little bit of context as to what the anomaly seems to be doing, it does seem to be like a literal rift in time that is appearing at various places in the colony.
Yeah, and this is the second time doing the podcast, and I forgot you talked about that. So, so thank you, Jake, for sharing that with me again and helping me.
I'm just reading off the script, man. I'm just.
Oh, I didn't know you had a script. So I don't remember exactly why, but well, here we got another ad. This is like the 7th ad I'm watching for you, Jake. You're probably making like $1 of ads just by.
You're paying me to do this. This is the time I'm getting paid to do the podcast.
So, anyways, somewhere around 13, 15, you start talking about how, maybe how did about a message getting to Earth, but on G4 sunbathing, we learned that the message wouldn't have been there for 92 years, running why.
Yeah.
Before I share this thing that I shared last time that you probably remember, can you kind of give some backstory of why you were talking about this message?
Yeah, so, okay, so in the 2023 ARG for Marathon, which is what we were talking about earlier with that Robert McLeese had worked on, we got confirmation of that from John Goff. We get this memo outlining Project Goliath, and Project Goliath, I believe, also was the code name for Marathon at Bungie before the game was announced. But Project Goliath in universe was the UESC mission to reclaim the colony at Tau Ceti and the Marathon itself. So we get this kind of memorandum. We get to see like the draft notes that people are leaving. We get something similar to this in the newest ARG as well, in reference to some documents specifically made for the Marathon. But this is talking about the project that's going to go out there. And so the way that the memo is written is like we're kind of getting this back end access to how these generals or leaders, like very assumedly like the highest level of personnel at the UESC, are approaching this mission. And they're talking about like, we don't know what it's going to be there. We don't know why we've lost communication. Could be a rampancy event. It could be some sort of rebel operations that snuck on board the Marathon. But basically they're preparing for a bunch of stuff, and they don't really have any idea as to what's occurred. And the thing about this is it's written in 2795, so just about 100 years prior to the events that we were playing through in game, which appear to be taking place in 2893. There's a few things that indicate that maybe that isn't the true date, but for all intents and purposes, what we're seeing appears to be in the late 29th century. And so one of kind of the big questions over the past 2 years, or whatever we've been yapping about this, has been how did the UESC know so quickly about the attack on the Marathon? Within a year, they were already planning to go make contact with him because communication had been lost. I think a few kind of ideas that were posited by me and other people who were talking about it were like, well, maybe the communication technology of the humanity and soul had advanced to the point where even if the signals that were being sent out were traveling at that speed, we had some sort of like, we could reach out and communicate with or at least receive those messages, right? Or we had some sort of advancement technology that made it possible. Another thought was that there was some sort of secret kind of system that they were using, potentially, that wasn't like a technological thing, but something that existed prior to the launch. It's kind of just technology that we're not aware of. This is more thinking along the lines of what you were just talking about earlier with, maybe humanity's had knowledge of Yarrow tech or had access to Yarrow technology since the late 90s or whatever, and now we're just kind of secretly have this advanced ability to do so. And then throughout that, we also get the UESC evidence files, which is kind of like this drone footage, which is literally the shot from the initial trailer of this fit. It's like it's titled like Unknown Presence. So the UESC, in the context of this new Marathon, at the highest level, seems to have no knowledge of this fit, no true knowledge about what occurred at the Marathon or the colony. And so basically what we're talking about, and I believe what I was pointing out in this section, if I rambled long enough to lose the point of what you were asking me, was that, okay, we still don't fully understand how this kind of communication question has been resolved in this universe. We do get some stuff that I'll talk about after Joku says this in the new game that maybe hints as a possible idea along the lines of the technology advancing. And then the other thing is a lot of kind of what I think has been interpreted about the new game prior to what we got in April was pretty, I don't want to say like reliant, but pretty heavily based around the concept that what seemed to be most canon and like where a lot of the information they were pulling for this new game was coming from was from the first Marathon game. That we weren't really getting anything, which just could just be tied to we were accessing, UESC information and these companies that wouldn't have access to this. But it didn't seem like anything was being hinted at that indicated that some of the stuff that happened in Marathon 2 and Infinity would be as relevant or even canonical. Obviously the end of Marathon 2 and Marathon Infinity talks about events that wouldn't make a lot of sense in this context, like the Svit and the humanity teaming up to sack the 4 homeworld or home system. I forget what language is used exactly, or Durandal returning to Seoul at some point to like way in the future. So a lot of that I hadn't really considered canon. Obviously, like we were talking about earlier, everything's kind of possible in this multiple timeline setting. But it's felt to me like what they were sticking to was more so the concepts and historical information from Marathon 1, which really kind of built out the larger humanity's presence in the 2400s and how technology advanced, as opposed to Marathon 2 and Infinity, which seemed to largely be focused on the Svit and the 4. It's kind of like more alien history and information that we get about those two components of the narrative, as opposed to what humanity's been up to or how they got to where they're at. And what Joku is bringing up here, or unless you want to explain it before
let me explain it. I need. This is the bombshell. You gotta act like you're surprised again, even though this is the second time. Okay, this is a terminal. Come and take your medicine. Exactly. This is a terminal. Come and take your medicine, and it talks about how Durandal actually visited Earth in the 17 years, somewhere in there between when he left the Marathon at Tau Ceti and went to Lowon. And this terminal says, from Durandal, says, I warned Seoul of its impending invasion and even stayed long enough to show the UESG how to build warp-capable fusion missiles. I feel some strange loyalty to humanity. So he purposely came to Earth, told them how to build warp-capable fusion missiles, or at least he did to the UESG. We kind of talked about how you can get into that. I'll let you explain that. But basically, the idea is that he visited Earth and he probably gave them some of this technology in order so that they could use that to help them against the 4. So, yeah. Well, and
which might be kind of what we're seeing here, I guess. So the problem that we have, kind of like including that in this narrative in the context of the new game, is that there's so many things that wouldn't be questions, basically, if Durandal showed. One, Durandal would be in a 4 ship. So the idea of the 4, the idea of the Svit, he even had Svit with him. So assuming he's there to truly, give some information, even you would think that potentially he would let them know about that. Although that's not directly stated, so it's not like that's inherently contradictory. But the concept, I guess, being that we're getting these kind of larger pieces of information about what the UESC knows and what they're trying to accomplish. And so the idea that Durandal was literally there and giving them this information doesn't seem to fit. But then again, if this is like very top secret, maybe such few people know about it. And then obviously, as we're kind of playing through the alpha, we get this sense that the UESC is focusing on other stuff, but we don't really know exactly what their mission is. And we're seeing it through the lens of these other corporations. And these corporations are slowly, Nucleark and Traxxas, slowly realizing, like, okay, there's something bigger going on. And the UESC's priorities do not lie in basically getting back their resources and making sure they have a monetary stake in Tau Ceti, but they're more interested in this anomaly and, this kind of the alien nature of what's occurring here, that there's something larger. And we don't get the exact details of what's uncovered in the game. But so I guess like interpreting the new stuff in the context that humanity was warned and given technology from a rampant AI who's in an alien ship seems inconsistent with what we've gotten. And also my thinking with the terminal itself originally, which I think what Joku's saying is probably more accurate, but I was thinking that I don't know, for some reason I just didn't put it together that he had physically gone there, but he's using the language of stayed, but more so he like transmitted this information somehow to try to preserve. But then again, it's like, why would Durandal be afraid of showing up there? He probably is cocky enough, right?
Yeah,
I don't think he's worried about getting shot out of the sky, right? But yeah, so basically trying to make this section where he talks about the contact with humanity in between that time line up with what's occurring here would really fall on creating some sort of explanation as to why the UESC is operating the way that they are, if they have like this kind of full knowledge and understanding of what's occurred on Tau Ceti in any sense, and then why in their own internal kind of security footage would they not understand what a SFIT is, or is this some sort of like 4D chess where 4D chess where they're playing even on the people inside, which if you look at real world alien conspiracy stuff, or if you've been following Lou Elizondo showing the photos to Congress recently, might not be too outside the realm of possibility. I'm sure there's a handful of you who just got that and are very tapped into the UFO world, so I appreciate you.
Yeah, and we kind of had an interesting moment in the first podcast. We can pretend to have that moment again, but I was kind of talking about when Jake kind of brought all that up. He's like, well, maybe Durandal visiting was something like how in Pathways into Darkness the Yarrow kind of appeared before the president and said, hey, you have a problem, and here's kind of how to deal with it. And then I didn't really think about when I was saying it, but I was like, well, Jay kind of thought that this was a saying. I don't know that it says he appeared before the UESG and not before the UESC. And so yes, yeah. So we're like, maybe it's specifically talking about the government and not the UESC, which is kind of interesting to think about. If it's the United Earth Space government, so the UESC doesn't have knowledge of this, or maybe only the higher ups do, and so it kind of maybe that's an explanation of how you can tie all this together. Maybe Durandal just didn't put on a big show. Maybe he just kind of came down, into the computer somehow and kind of gave this information to the government, the space government, whatever that entity is, and then kind of left. And so a lot of people didn't even know he was there, so maybe it wasn't this super flashy, flamboyant thing. Although we know he did, I think, is at the end of Marathon Infinity, he does make a flashy show on I think that was
make sure they don't forget
that was end of Marathon
me.
2, I think, actually. Yeah, but anyways.
Yeah. And the Manus Solaire Day, he shows up to be cocky for a little bit, I think.
Yeah, but maybe this visit, in terms of
he played it cool.
In terms of the new Marathon lore that Bungie is putting together for the new game, anyways, maybe that's how they're explaining how this thing might have happened. We'll have to wait and see. It's something interesting to think about.
Well, wait, hold on. You just saying that does bring up a really good point, because I do think that it is funny to contrast like Durandal, who's like insanely yours, Durandal, in contrast to, I think it's fair to maybe assume, we don't know for certain, but we're hearing Durandal in these trailers, I think is a fair interpretation. He's very serious and gruff and like cool, it's like he's very wise and like he's saying this kind of insidious stuff that's very intriguing, and it is funny. It's like he's not going, give me a D, give me a U, give me an R. So you're right, maybe he is in this iteration not as much of a kind of 90s nerd version of a evil AI and more of like a cool savant version of a modern AI that we get, which is awesome. And also, I do want to hear your thoughts on that, specifically about the UEG and the UESG and the UESC. I know there's a really good page that kind of breaks down all the government or the variations of acronyms we get for government entities throughout the Marathon series on the story page. And I don't know, maybe if you have the context or if you've kind of read enough to have an opinion about it in terms of the new stuff, but is your thinking right now that, I guess either in the context of the old games or also in the context of the new games, do you think that when they're going through and they're talking about like the UEG or the UESG and the UESC, do you think in the context of the originals or the new ones that those are truly separate entities, or do you think that those are probably, or were at least probably meant to be different acronyms for the same entity that was changed at some point, and just the sheer amount of written words that they had, they just weren't able to go back and switch it over the right way? Or
I think they were just using different acronyms and stuff. They were just kind of inconsistent in their terminology, because just think about it. Back then they weren't necessarily thinking of the UESC as what you think of like now. It's like some hardcode faction, you know what I mean? Like, then they were just kind of putting the story together, and it just was meant to be United Earth Space Council. So they're talking about in relation of the kind of like government or whatever, kind of like controlling Mars and and Tau Ceti, the Marathon, all this stuff. I just think they were thinking of it as like some big government, and I don't think they necessarily were trying to distinguish the two. But I think, if the new Marathon game is using that kind of distinction, I think it's not going against the canon of the original game necessarily.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was just kind of like the dates. They were just not consistent in their terminology, and I think, it is what it is. But maybe if you dig in enough, there's some explanation you can find. But I didn't necessarily see anything that would clearly indicate that was the case. So
yeah, it is interesting. That could be another, like we were talking about earlier, that could be another thing where, it was just kind of one of these inconsistencies in writing, but now maybe in this new iteration they're gonna canonize that as like, there actually was like these separate entities, that the United Earth Government and the United Earth Space Council were separate in some ways, and there's kind of like a complex history of how these governments formed and how they interact. That could be something that's in the same way that we're talking about the different canons in each game, how they introduce maybe those as separate entities as well, to explain some stuff that doesn't add up entirely one-to-one.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's mostly the first Marathon game that has some of that, but I'd have to go back and check. But anyways, my last thought, I don't really have any more on your video, was just, that, you see those planets kind of close to Tau Ceti, maybe they're another planet in the Tau Ceti system, maybe it's a moon, or maybe one of them could be the Spit-Kerr coming to Lowan. And I think you might have talked with My Name is Biff or somebody about that before, so I don't think this is necessarily a new idea to you. But I do think that, Durandal coming, I do think there's a very, very high probability, based on what we've seen so far, that there is a working character on Tau Ceti, and that could be why Durandal is coming. But if he's also bringing the Spit, maybe the Spit-Kerr came along, and maybe the boomer, or that maybe the boomer is destroyed. I don't know. I don't really know what happened to the boomer, in Marathon Infinity in the final timeline. Maybe I'll know after I kind of get my Marathon in depth series through that and kind of dissect that a little bit more. But I think that Durandal arriving on the Spit-Kerr, or on the Kilia, one of the sister moons that the Spit-Kerr had left Lowan onto, with Yarrow with a Y, and all the Spit-Kerr on it, I think is a very good possibility, right, of what could have happened. And so it's just something interesting to think about. We'll see where Bungie goes with this, but I think that could be kind of pretty exciting to see that they maybe defeated the working character and then realize that there's a working character on Tau Ceti, and now they need to go and deal with that. I think that's a very interesting possible plot line Bungie could be planning, but we'll see what happens. I think a working character being on Tau Ceti is honestly a very exciting thing that they could take the story with, because you could explain, just like in Pathways in Darkness, just creatures coming up, maybe a pyramid just showing up. You could take literally take the maps we play on and show them get distorted and changed, and new creatures show up because of the effects of the working character over time. There's a lot of interesting ways Bungie could go with that, and I think it's pretty exciting. I think that's what they're. I actually think that's very likely what they're doing, and I think that's pretty exciting, and that could be really cool. But I think Bungie's kind of keeping their hands closed, so they're just hinting at things for now.
Yep.
So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're totally right. My dream, which I've said a few times on my channel, but I think my dream idea like that they could do would be, figure out what happened to the colony, bring back the four, bring back the working character, have this whole thing play out, but then the ultimate big bad, like later down the road in a different season, would be Leela, who's now this like ultra powerful AI controlling this, multi-world FTL network or whatever, has become this like insane sentient godlike power. That's my dream. I wanna fight evil Leela because I think she deserves it. I think she deserves putting a little hurt on everyone. She definitely got fucked over the most. Was the kindest one, and got it the worst, I think.
Well, yeah, and just talking about how she goes rampant and completely destroys whatever the alien race that the Force sold her to. It's pretty badass. Maybe
Yeah.
Leela comes back and she's still the nice AI, but now she has a chip on her shoulder and she's much more powerful and enraged than she was
just a little
before.
sassy.
Yeah. So I think that would be really cool. Yeah, there's so many cool things they could do in this game. And remember, at the end of Marathon 2, it talks about how many years later, they go and destroy the four, but because of the events on Marathon Infinity, the working character, that timeline was erased or didn't happen, and so. If maybe Durandal's still planning on doing that, I'm sure he is at the end of Marathon Infinity, but maybe if he discovered there was a working character on Tau Ceti, that kind of plan is maybe delayed until later, and so maybe we could see the four coming back, to mess with Durandal, or to go to this working character also, because maybe they figured out it is there because of the events on Loan. So there's a lot of interesting things to think about. So
Yeah.
but anyways,
Absolutely.
well, can you give us your closing thoughts there, Jake, and wrap this all up with a bow tie?
Oh, absolutely. Closing thoughts here. Well, closing thought number one, Joku's amazing. Subscribe to his channel, like all of his videos, and put on the Marathon in-depth series to go to bed to. Closing thought number two, I would say, obviously, we've kind of been a little bit glazing how cool we think it is, where this could go. So I'm definitely excited to see kind of how they answer a lot of these questions that we pointed out. And I'm excited to also continue to get to chat with Joku whenever I put something out and I get some added context from the lore master himself. So I appreciate you and I appreciate your time. And I'm sorry the first recording didn't work. I tried to recreate all of the moments as best as I could. Just know the first one was cinema.
Thanks, Jake. You did such a good job. I heard some oohs and ahs, I think, while I was explaining to
You heard them already.
at least telepathically at the very least. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Yeah, let us know if there's more podcast kind of topics you want to cover. Give this video a like. Send Jake some love too. We're so blessed to have him as part of the Marathon community now. And so yeah, see you later, Jake. Have a good one.
Absolutely. See you later. Bye.